All right, welcome. So why delaying gratification is actually more pleasurable than pleasure itself. So this video is all about the power of delaying gratification and why, in the long term at least, it's actually more pleasurable than pursuing pleasure. So if you guys are interested in joining Self-Improvement Synthesized, that is the top link in the description. That is my community where I help athletes and entrepreneurs become the best at what they do by optimizing their daily routines, habits, and goal setting. But without further ado, let's get into why delaying gratification is actually more pleasurable than pursuing pleasure itself. So my life, when I was addicted to things, overall, right, not in the moments where I was actually pursuing those forms of pleasure, but overall, my life felt shit, right? I felt like shit all the time. Overall, my baseline level of pleasure and enjoyment of life was low, was extremely low. So everything that I was doing, basically just being, right? Every time I had a moment where I was away from any type of stimulation, I felt like shit, right? I felt like ass. I felt like just horrible, right? Like is the best way to describe it, right? It felt painful. It felt painful just to live. It felt painful just to be alive, right? It felt painful just to move through my day-to-day life, right? And that was the result of me overstimulating myself with these different forms of pleasure, right? By pursuing pleasure, right? Porn, weed, social media. I wasn't playing video games at the time that I'm referring to, but when I was playing video games, it was the same thing, right? All of these addictions was what I was pursuing, going after, and these things gave me pleasure in the moments. But over time, two things happened. A, when I was away from those things, my life slowly became less and less pleasurable and eventually painful to a degree. But also, even the things that I was finding pleasurable slowly but surely became less and less pleasurable to the point that they just felt normal. They just felt like that was my baseline. That was how I reached like a baseline level of enjoyment. Just feeling okay. I had to be doing these things to feel just okay. But then what happened was, as I changed my perception and my perspective on life, I changed my goals. I started to have higher goals and intentions with my life. What ended up happening was, in turn, I started doing things that were more difficult in the moment, that were actually more painful in the moment. But over time, what happened was my life overall became more pleasurable. Overall, I actually had a better experience of life. Overall, I actually enjoyed what I was doing more. I enjoyed not just what I was doing in the moment, right? The painful things like the gym, reading, working, but I enjoyed just being, right? I enjoyed the drive home from the gym, which was something for a while I couldn't possibly find joy in or pleasure in, just driving around, right? When I first started driving, yes. But then as I got deeper into these addictions, it just was another thing that was just kind of a drag. But as I started working on myself again, I actually found pleasure in simple things like driving home from the gym, right? And for me, where I live, the closest gym to me is about 20 minutes away, so it's a bit of a drive, right? So I always have to drive quite far to go to the gym. But the drive itself was actually quite enjoyable now, right? The drive itself is enjoyable. And the other things that were enjoyable was being in my room, right? For a period of time, literally just sitting in my room was painful. Was hard. I had to have some type of stimulation. I had to have my phone. I had to have my computer. I had to have YouTube or TikTok or weed, some type of weed, right? Or I'd be watching porn. Whatever it was, I always had to have stimulation. Otherwise, it would feel uncomfortable just sitting in my room. My safe space, right? I was uncomfortable just sitting there, just being in my room, which now is set up to what I just called my safe space, right? It's set up as more of a library than anything. It's more of a library. So it's for introspection, reflection, and learning. And in that space, I feel most comfortable now because that's the state I like to be in. I like to be in pursuit of knowledge. I like to be learning. I like to be understanding more about myself, right? I like to be writing. So I've set up my room in such a way that it is a studio of sorts. Right? And now when I'm there, I don't even have to be doing anything or pursuing anything like I just mentioned. I don't have to be reading a book. I don't have to be writing. I don't have to be thinking. I can just sit there and I can be comfortable, and I can be happy to a degree, content, right? I feel a level of pleasure from just sitting there, right? And that was something that I never experienced when I was addicted. When I was addicted, I couldn't find pleasure in anything but those addictions, right? So why chasing pleasure actually results in suffering. So the first thing we need to understand is dopamine. Dopamine spikes and dopamine dips. When dopamine spikes, right, when we get huge dopamine spikes from, let's say, social media, let's say weed, porn, whatever, right, junk food, video games. When we get the dopamine spike from these things, what happens is after we get the thing, dopamine actually dips, and it dips below baseline. So that means that our basic level of motivation, of desire, of comfort goes down. And so when we pursue these things over a long period of time, we actually lower our overall baseline of dopamine to a level where life itself will start to actually feel painful. If you read the book Dopamine Nation, it talks about how there is a pain and a pleasure balance, a scale within our brain. Whenever we experience pleasure, an equal amount of pain is then applied in order to balance the system back out and return back to homeostasis. So when we chronically pursue pleasure, we end up in a chronic state of pain, right? The teeter, think of it as like a teeter-totter. It's constantly tipping on the side of pain. And it gets to the point where it doesn't ever go back to pleasure. Because there's so much, we're experiencing so much pleasure that it needs to stay on the side of pain to balance it out, because that's unhealthy, the amount of pleasure that we're pursuing and feeling and actually experiencing, right? So we need to balance it out by also feeling an opposite amount of pain, which is bad, to say the least, right? It is bad, because what that means is that when we are pursuing this pleasure and when we are receiving this pleasure, it's actually draining. It's draining us. It's killing us more than anything else. It's killing you, right? It is making you, it isn't necessarily killing you directly, right? The pain itself is actually a positive thing that helps you return back to homeostasis, but it is a feeling of dying, right? Because we are in this state of chronic pain now, because we have tipped the scale to the side of pleasure so much that we now have this almost permanent state of pain, right? And that pain only goes away if we feel it long enough to return back to homeostasis. But most of us continue to pursue pleasure to keep avoiding this feeling of pain. And so the molecules in the brain that actually cause this pain build up and build up and build up, but aren't fully processed, because you keep pursuing more pain and it keeps building up. And it's this loop, pursuing pleasure to avoid the pain, and then the pain comes as a result of pursuing the pleasure, right? The pain comes as a result of pursuing the pleasure. And so not only are we actually over time causing ourselves to feel more pain, but the pleasure that we're pursuing, the type of pleasure that we're pursuing, is only a fleeting moment of enjoyment. We only feel it for a fleeting moment, right? We don't actually feel this pleasure for a long period of time. We feel it for a moment. It's just a fleeting period of enjoyment, and then it's gone. And what follows is this pain. What follows is this suffering as the result of us pursuing the pleasure. And so what we're actually doing is we're seeking out self-destruction for self-gratification. We are pursuing a form of self-destruction, but an instantly pleasurable version of that. And so it feels as though we're doing something good. It feels as though we're doing something positive. But in all cases, this is a form of self-destruction in exchange for self-gratification. So now, why chasing suffering actually results in pleasure, right? So just as we mentioned how dopamine spikes work and how the pleasure-pain balance works, the opposite is true. When we pursue pain, when we tip it to the side of pain, we automatically feel pleasure as the result to balance it out, to balance that scale back out. And so that pleasure is actually a positive thing, because it is the result of us pursuing something painful and difficult, right? And this is a form of self-sacrifice, right? We are sacrificing in order to feel long-term pleasure and enjoyment, right? We are sacrificing to become better instead of sacrificing ourselves to feel better. Does this make sense? We are sacrificing the desire for the actual feeling instead of sacrificing the feeling for the desire. Does this make sense? Instead of sacrificing your goals and the reality that you want, you sacrifice the shit that you don't want, the shit that's killing you and holding you back, in exchange for the positive, the true pleasures of life. And so this results in long-term fulfillment. When we actually pursue pain, when we pursue, let's say, exercise, let's say work, right? We create a sense of long-term fulfillment, right? It's a little bit difficult for me to record this video right now, but for the rest of the day, I'm going to feel amazing because I got this work done. I accomplished this, and this makes me feel fulfilled. I feel like I'm really, truly helping people. And so therefore that feeling of fulfillment carries with me throughout the rest of the day. And so this is a form of self-development for self-transformation, right? You are essentially developing yourself instead of destroying yourself. And in exchange, you get self-transformation. But the self-development part is painful. The self-development part is hard. The self-development part is difficult. But it's better than destroying yourself. And the result of that, instead of a little bit of self-gratification and pleasure, we actually get self-transformation, which is much more fulfilling, much more permanent. And you are essentially building yourself up through the pain. You are using the pain, and this is a specific type of pain, right? This isn't like go cut yourself or go burn yourself and you'll feel great after, right? No. This is the type of pain that we experience when we are resisting something difficult, when we are doing something hard, and that resistance is the pain that I'm talking about. By pushing through that resistance, by allowing yourself to feel that pain, you actually build yourself up. You create a better, higher, more full version of yourself. Right? So if you guys are interested in self-improvement and mastering self-improvement and implementing it into your life in a way that you can maximize your results, go ahead and click the link in the description, this top link, Self-Improvement Synthesized, or you can click that second link in the description and I will coach you one-on-one. But aside from that, if you guys would like to learn more about self-improvement for free, go ahead and click the subscribe button. But that's all from me, and I'm out of here. Peace.